Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our closing panel discussion. We have quite a wonderful group of people who are going to give us their thoughts on blockchain. We have a series of questions that we're going to ask them to respond to. But first, I would like to introduce you to our panel. Because Jason Griffey, who was our keynote speaker, did not have time for any questions, he has graciously accepted a position on this panel to be able to give some more ideas about blockchain. He may have to leave a bit early, but we are very happy that he is joining us. We also have with us Bohyun Kim, who is the Chief Technology Officer and Associate Professor at the University of Rhode Island Libraries. Formerly, she was the Associate Director for Library Applications and Knowledge Systems at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Health Sciences and Human Services Library, and one of the 4 founding librarians of the Florida International University Medical Library that opened in 2009. She currently serves on both the Advisory Committee for the Office for Information Technology Policy of ALA, the Advisory Group for the ALA Center for the Future of Libraries, and is the President-elect President for LIDA, the Library and Information Technology Association, for 2017 to 19. Toby Greenwalt joins us from Pittsburgh, where he is the Director of Digital Strategy and Technology Implementation at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. In that position, he oversees the strategic elements of the library's technology plan. He works to create a sense of continuity between digital and analog library services while making sure the library meshes with community life. Prior to his current position, Toby was the Virtual Services Coordinator at the Skokie Public Library. And when I was looking up some information about him, I just wanted to include this personal note that this is the 3rd year that Toby and his son Bert have run the Pittsburgh Kids Marathon and the Pittsburgh Half Marathon on behalf of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. And he has an active following on Twitter at The Analog Divide. Miguel Figueroa has a distinguished leadership career. Currently, he is the director of ALA's Center for the Future of Libraries and has held positions with the American Theological Library Association, and he has been director at ALA's Office for Literacy and Outreach Services and Office for Diversity and Spectrum Scholarship Program. He's been with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine and Neil Schumann Publishers. And all of our panelists are very well known with technology, are involved with professional associations, and we certainly value what they have to say today. So I'd like to start off with a question to Bohyun and Miguel on if you would tell us what is your general perception of blockchain. Bohyun, if you'd like to start.
Sure, yeah. So my general perception of the blockchain technology is that it has a huge potential for both the innovation and disruption. But at the same time, I think there are certain risks and challenges associated with blockchain. So those will need to be addressed before it is really ready for mainstream adoption. So in terms of the innovation, I think it is pretty clear that the greatest merit of the blockchain technology, also known as distributed ledger technology, is that it records and preserves data, usually transaction-related data, in a tamper-proof manner by virtue of its technical implementation alone. So once the records are added to the blockchain ledger, they are immutable and irreversible. And this is really, really interesting because it sort of makes the role of the traditional third-party authority obsolete and almost unnecessary. So usually in any sort of important transactions, the third-party authority is involved so that they can validate and guarantee the integrity of the records. And the blockchain is basically proposing that the role of those third-party authorities is no longer necessary because the technology can just replace that. So in that sense, the blockchain technology is almost like a trust protocol. It replaces the role of trust that used to be played by these parties. So imagine you can transfer like funds across different countries without going through banks. Then obviously you don't have to pay all the service fees. So that's going to really lower your cost. Also, the transactions will take place immediately, so you don't have to wait for the transactions to become official. So those are some of the really exciting part of the blockchain technology. On the other hand, there are some risks as well. So for example, blockchain relies on the public key cryptography. So if you lose your private key and you have really important transactions, you have this great risk. So you cannot really prove that you were involved in the transaction. And since the blockchain sort of replaces the third-party authorities, there is no like authority to step in and remedy the situation, so you are really all by yourself. So do we really want that? So that's one of the risks. Another issue is interoperability that needs to be resolved, because right now there's no easy way to make different blockchain systems to talk to one another. So that's another issue. The scalability of the blockchain technology is also something to think about if we're thinking about expanding blockchain to many different areas. Also the potential security issue called like 51% attack. So if someone or an organization gets a hold of more than 50% of the entire computing network related to this distributed ledger, then they can reverse the transaction theoretically. And if you do that, the entire ledger's credibility and legitimacy is going to be thrown out of the window. So that seems like realistic, even though it is technically really, really going to be very hard. It is not entirely impossible. And the last issue is often mentioned, the enormous energy consumption of the blockchain technology. In order to process the records in that distributed manner, it has to consume a lot of electricity, and it's not going to be sustainable for the future for our environment. So those issues are sort of significant. So I think the blockchain technology has a lot of potential, but those issues will need to be addressed in order for it to be really ready for the mainstream adoption.
Thank you so much. Miguel, do you have anything to add to that? And if not, the next question is, many topics were addressed today. Which ones do you think are the most compelling for our profession?
So, I mean, just to follow up on what Bohyun had said, I love that she started and ended with this concept of potential, because I think that's where we are right now in our conversations about blockchain. So many people are talking to us about the potential for this technology to transform a number of sectors. I think with that potentiality, though, there's the opportunity for some skepticism sometimes. I know that Toby and I had been chatting offline, and we kind of mentioned, it would be really interesting to just go in here and be that sort of Statler and Waldorf character from the Muppets. They were those two Muppets that sat in the back balcony and heckled everything else that was going on. And so I think there's an opportunity for some skepticism around blockchain, but we have to reorient ourselves away from that skepticism, I think, towards curiosity and continuing to watch what's happening in all of these different sectors. Because if this many people are talking about something, likely something will percolate out of it. One of those potential outcomes will come to fruition, and we don't want to be caught flat-footed in our conversations around that. As we think about some of the most compelling issues or uses for our profession, I think that it's really easy for us to center ourselves in some of the things that information professions have traditionally owned, and to look at how blockchain might be used for defaulting to the idea of the objects, the information objects. So I sat in on Pat Frank's excellent session on blockchain and record keeping, and it spoke to my sort of information professional mindset, or even its applications in the art market for verifying objects that Eric Meyer and Robert Norton had led. And again, it was that sort of object orientation that I think that a lot of librarians and information professionals are interested in. But at the same time, I think it's really important to watch maybe some of the ways that blockchain is going to change some sectors or industries or topics that that touch libraries in lots of different ways. So I keep being interested in how blockchain might be used as a tool for verifying identity. Austin and New York have both invested in technologies that utilize blockchain as a method for verifying information, identification for vulnerable populations, specifically people who are homeless, for whom having a tangible identification card or other proof of identity can sometimes be problematic because they live a transient lifestyle, or perhaps because their possessions are subject to removal by city officials or other agents. And so these social innovators are looking at how we could create a digital identity that is blockchain secured, wherein the individual could manage that and have access to it no matter what their circumstances might be, but that they could also access a range of social services and other types of activities and store that information in the blockchain. Well, for anyone who does libraries, in order for us to check out materials or to even sometimes let people use our computers or other types of facilities, we need some amount of identification, whether it's proof of residency or demonstration of their affiliation with a campus or other thing. So that's one of those areas where it's a tangential touch with us, but it's really important to kind of keep our eyes on those movements. Or even some of what MIT is doing, where it's blockchain technology enabled degrees or credentials or other types of movements. That's certainly something that we interface with both as institutions that support education, but also perhaps as institutions that are looking towards the future of recruitment and hiring, that there may come a time where we have applicants who, instead of submitting a transcript or something else, they provide to us a blockchain-enabled degree or some other demonstration of their skills and credentials to work within our institutions. So I think that those are really interesting ways to think about how it's a compelling case for us to keep in mind what's happening with blockchain.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Identified many relevant topics. Toby, are there other applications that you could add to this? And we'll get to some concerns later on. But right now, compelling applications for our profession?
Absolutely. I noticed there was just a question. There's some back and forth in the comments, and also reflected in one of the presentations from earlier. This one in particular, Ryan Hess's from Palo Alto, and really thinking about how community-based collections and how other kind of less traditionally published material can be facilitated through methods of access and distribution can be facilitated through on the blockchain. Thinking about how that can help extend community voices in a way that goes beyond the some of the other previous efforts we've had to try to facilitate efforts in self-publishing and other types of community documentation. I think this gives us some tools to help validate and verify kind of ongoing documents. That's still not without its risks, but I'll save that for later.
Okay, fair enough. Jason, I know that you responded to a question in the chat, but would you like to elaborate on it verbally?
Sure, I can do that really quickly. So there was a question by a very, very anonymous person. For those of you who don't get the joke, Satoshi Nakamoto is the anonymous name given to the creator of Bitcoin. No one knows who he is, or they are, I suppose, to be more neutral. Yeah, so that's the name itself is a joke. So the question from Satoshi was, how could blockchain be applied to enhance or circumvent scholarly publishing industry? And there was a couple of different takes a couple of different ideas I had on that. The one that I think is most interesting is there was heard an interesting sort of description of a project just a few weeks ago that was involved in tracking, especially sciences, the hard sciences, because priority of publication is so important in the academic world there, that using a blockchain-driven system that could do kind of real-time tracking of everything from idea to data creation to data collection to experimentation to results to initial publication to accepted publication to and trying to get the entire process sort of tracked and followed along in a system is something that was super interesting, I thought, and is kind of an ideal use case for something like a blockchain.
Thank you so much. This is going to be for Miguel. How should libraries approach blockchain? Is there anything that it should replace?
Well, I may default to the skepticism on this one, I guess. I think it might be a little bit early for us to think about what exactly it should replace. In thinking about this, I went back to an article I had read last year from the Harvard Business Review, and it talked about, why every organization needs an augmented reality strategy. And I thought it was really interesting to think about, like, are we pushing this idea that everybody needs to have a blockchain strategy a little bit too early? And I thought about, in that article, even from Harvard Business Review, they started to talk about, part of your strategy could just be thinking about, well, we're in a wait-and-see mode. We're thinking about who potential partners might be with us if we need to encounter or utilize blockchain in a very real way. So I think thinking about that might be really important for different organizations. Is this central to the goals that we have to pursue? Would it make us distinct within our specific organization or the environment that we're trying to support? Certainly in records management, it might be more interesting and applicable, and perhaps in a public library, we might want to develop a strategy of how do we teach and learn with our community about this technology that could be potentially disruptive. And then also thinking, will it have an impact on how we develop new technologies? Libraries are always investing in new technologies and new innovations. Perhaps blockchain now needs to be one of those future technologies that we need to consider, that if we're going to make financial investments into new systems, should we build planning or room within which we can also embrace blockchain's uses or blockchain's eventual broad applicability across lots of different environments. So giving ourselves some room to think about blockchain is going to be really important. I don't yet know if there's too much need for libraries to allocate budget to this if they don't really have a clear sense of how it fits into the services that they're looking to provide.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Following up on your thoughts of waiting a while for blockchain to see how it all pans out, Bohyun and Toby, do you agree with that? Is now the time for blockchain? Or as we've heard in some circles, blockchain is a solution in search of a problem. Bohyun, if you could address that first, and then Toby.
Sure, yeah. I think, in my opinion, I think the blockchain technology, even though it has some issues and risks and challenges that I have talked about in the beginning, I think it's pretty clear that there are really compelling use cases in which the blockchain technology can really make a huge difference. So, not necessarily in the library land, but in general, I think the blockchain technology definitely proved its value enough, in spite of some of the issues that it will have to overcome for the mainstream adoption. So, for example, the compelling case could be that, recently, there was this World Food Program, which is one of UN's food aid agency, and they used the blockchain for the fund transfer to provide refugees with food aid, and they basically provide cash for them. And by using blockchain, they cut out the services that they used to pay the banks, which is almost like 30% of the entire food aid money, and they cut that by 98%. So something like that can really show the potential of the blockchain and what the benefit can be when it is successfully implemented. Also, I think Miguel kind of mentioned this a little bit in terms of digital identity, but particularly when that digital identity in terms of blockchain can be provided for regulators, who do not have any identity documents with them and they have to establish new laws in a completely foreign land. Is there something that the blockchain technology can do for them? So depending on the use cases, this technology can be extremely powerful. And another example that shows the power of blockchain technology is like Horizon Space, which is a voting platform. So depending on where you are living, the secure voting can be very challenging, and this sort of platform can provide a way to create different sort of political movement that is really desired by the majority of the people, but not possible. There is another attempt to take a stab at journalism that preserves the integrity of public discourse, and it is called civil, and people can look it up. But there are lots of different examples in which you can really see that a lot of startups and even larger companies like IBM or Maersk or Sony are looking into ways to apply blockchain technology for auditing purposes or greater efficiency purposes or experimental purposes. So in my mind, I think the blockchain technology has already identified some really compelling use cases. So to that question of whether now is the right time to look at the blockchain technology, I think it's definitely the right time for us to take a serious look at the technology. But the question is whether some of those issues that I mentioned are going to be resolved in one way or another so that it can be expanded in a way that would make a real difference to people. For example, blockchain literacy would be a real barrier for it to be adopted by a large number of people. So that is my take on it.
Well, thank you, Bohyun. Well, Toby, is blockchain a solution in search of a problem, or what barriers should libraries consider when thinking about blockchain?
Yeah, great questions. And I think, as far as the question of if this is a solution in search of a problem, I kind of come down on that same degree of healthy skepticism that both Miguel and Bohyun have expressed. In dealing with the public, I feel like we have to represent an entire wide-ranging spectrum of technology adoption. We may be out there supporting people who are building completely new tools, but we're also out there helping people learn how to create email addresses or learn how to use a mouse. And I think as far as blockchain is concerned, a lot of us in the library land are on that how do we use a mouse end of the spectrum. And so as a result, I think the question of whether blockchain is going to function well will really come down to at what point does it become more like infrastructure and less like innovation, that sense where certain elements will become just a somewhat invisible component of core library functions, in which it'll just work for some people, but for other people they will be out there kind of doing what they do now, starting to build new tools and creating new functions that use blockchain as their back end. So, with that in mind, I think it's best to take a pragmatic approach to keep monitoring the situation and keep looking for those indicators that critical mass is growing among the library world. I really do feel like this is the wise move for most organizations out there, outside of the ones that are really looking to pursue bleeding edge practices, and particularly right now when there are not as many library-centric best practices out there. And of course, that might be the sort of thing that those bleeding edge libraries might seek to pursue. Similarly, that question of barriers, I think the biggest part right now might be the mental barrier, the like naturally conservative inclination to tread cautiously when trying to build new infrastructure. I think this is, and that's a case where there's a really totally understandable inclination to be more on the skeptic side rather than the enthusiast side. I think the other barrier might come from, as indicated earlier, how we tend to, where we see our role in the transaction and the proposition that blockchain is really working to decentralize what used to be our centralized role in that, thinking about how we tend to see ourselves as validators of information literacy and curators of resources. As more of that becomes spread and blockchain helps us facilitate that, the question of where our role sits will continue to be raised. I do still feel like there is a role for us, even throughout, even as that infrastructure is increasingly managed through the blockchain. We'll still have a strong function as arbiters of trust and as holders of particular hashes or segments that are related to user activity and knowledge exchange. But it's really going to require us to kind of reorient our approach to library values. Again, thinking, kind of the same way we looked at ebooks, thinking less about the container and more about the content. But I think there's also some questions that come in the raw infrastructure that's required to turn blockchain into infrastructure. And I think we're seeing those stories about I think was mentioned about the amounts of processing power that's required to facilitate cryptocurrency, for example. That's led to shortages in high-end graphics processors and dramatic spikes in overall power consumption around the world. And I think library data is going to require far less horsepower. It's still going to require some additional outlay, and that is only going to become more of an issue as blockchain-based operations grow and scale. Other elements, I think this is going to require a certain amount of failure, and again, as any new innovation in our industry, it's going to require people to be more and more comfortable with that, because this is so, this requires a lot of kind of the lesser seen elements of library service. But very core functions of library service, there's a lot of reasons to tread carefully until we get some more of those best practices hashed out. Yeah, so I think in the long run, we're going to kind of see two things here. The development's going to be slow, or at the very least somewhat deliberate, on kind of the widespread organizational scale. But there's also going to be some really fast attempts to build new tools and commodify them. Most libraries lack those core resources, whether they're financial, knowledge-based, or otherwise, to build their own infrastructure tools, meaning that the people who do have those things or greater expertise into the window of the blockchain, they'll be making more efforts to provide the solution and, of course, charge a premium for doing so. I think that's going to build some competition in the market, and I think we're going to have to look at how, which of these players, which things settle in. So I think some things won't always be successful. But with all that in mind, I think this natural urge to kind of tread lightly into unknown territory is very much a barrier on the part of the libraries. But for our, just for our profession, from our profession's perspective, that's really a feature here rather than a bug.
Well, thank you. It's certainly clear from hearing everything today and all of our speakers that there are many issues and possibilities to consider. Before we close, Jason, do you have any final reflections on the day? I know you've been working with people from around the world on different blockchain projects. You've spoken widely on it. In a minute, can you do a wrap up?
I can give one piece based on some of the comments from Toby and Miguel and Bohyun. The one thing that drove me to be super interested in this area is, the technology, which I'm obviously a fan of, but more importantly, the idea that this technology implements a decentralization of information flows, providing just more democratized access to information. blockchain is one piece of it. There's a lot of other technologies that are also in this general arena of decentralization, and I do feel very strongly that this is the kind of future of the communications networks that we're going to be using. Libraries as sort of the defenders of the democratic access to information should be, could be, will be, I hope, one of the places that helps this new technology sort of grow and become kind of central to the way that our communities access their information. So I'm interested in it from a very sort of broad, theoretical, policy-driven sort of focus, as well as the technologies. And I think that we have an opportunity here to be really central to the future of the way the web works. I think that's really exciting.
Well, thank you, Jason, Miguel, Bohyun, Toby, really helping us to consider the issues of importance. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to turn this over to Sandy Hirsch, my co-PI on this project, and we welcome everybody's input on our website and our blog as we continue the discussion of the roles and the implications of blockchain in libraries. Sandy?
Thank you. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much to all of our fantastic speakers and all of the participants today. I think this was an outstanding conference, a really excellent discussion, and I hope you'll work with us to continue this conversation. And I just want to give another thank you to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for supporting this work and this project. We're really grateful for their support. So I look forward to our future conversations on this important topic, and thank you all for participating, and look forward to the next time. Thanks. Bye.